Hey everybody, and welcome to the Truth About Dyslexia. In today's episode, I've got Martin on with me all the way from the United Kingdom. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about his dyslexic story. He's a brilliant example of an adult dyslexic that kind of found out later in life, which is so common these days with the absolute terrible ways that none of us were, or so many people weren't diagnosed. And we're also going to really dive into a couple of topics. We want to talk a bit around mental health, and how that, how we can kind of support each other, what has worked for us, and what we can look at in our lives. So, welcome to the pod, Martin.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, and where are you? Where are you based in the UK? I'm always terrible at places.
Everyone has heard of the place I live because they've heard of a place called New York. I live in York.
York, yes.
It's a beautiful little place. It's the north of England, but if you see a map of England, it's about halfway up Britain.
Okay, and what's the football team you support? This is the real question.
Well, I support the mighty York City football team.
York City.
Towards the top of Division 6 at the moment.
Wow, Division 6. Fantastic. Love that. Yeah, I'm a big football fan over here in New Zealand. We only support Premier League teams though, because we don't get as lower in the league, sadly, most of the time.
Yeah, I'm a Spurs fan in that case. If you want my yeah.
God, yeah.
I'm the one.
You're a sucker for punishment, mate. I'm just kidding.
You're right.
Love it. Well, welcome to the pod. So let's dive in, because we were just chatting before we jumped onto the recording about how you were diagnosed, and I think it's a story that's really, really common. And I thought maybe you could kind of share how it came about.
Yeah, well, I went to a university. I didn't get to university until I was like in my mid-20s, because I'd failed at school. I'd dropped out. I'd gone back in again. I'd been held back a year. I'd dropped out. The classic story. I got to university in sort of my mid-20s, and by the time I was 30, I was doing my master's degree. It takes a long time. And I had a lot of friends who had been assessed as dyslexic, and I didn't believe them. I genuinely didn't believe them, because their dyslexia wasn't what I'd heard dyslexia was. And a lot of them were saying to me, Martin, you're dyslexic, get yourself tested. And I would just say, look, mate, you're no more dyslexic than I am. And eventually I gave into the peer pressure, got myself tested, found out that I was dyslexic, found out that they were dyslexic, realized what dyslexia was. And it was a shock to the system. I went through, as a lot of people do when they find out, I went through a lot of shame. Discovering that I was dyslexic.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? And it's interesting also that you what I see and what I found when I started to dig deeper was the amount of we're drawn to people that are like us. I think that's part of humanity. It's part of keeping our mental health in some form of check. But you realize that 80-90% of the people you like and want to hang out with are also either dyslexic at some level, aren't they?
Yeah, and I suppose it's because of the way we think. We think slightly sort of eccentrically or a little bit differently or something. And a lot of people who aren't dyslexic just don't get it.
No, they kind of look at it and go, hey, that's not what they go, it's not kind of like what's on television and what's been kind of taught to them all their life. Yeah. And we just stand out of the box. Huh? It's just a bit different.
Yeah. And this is actually really, it annoys me, because there's a lot of talk about dyslexia is a phonological processing issue, and that's how a lot of people describe dyslexia. And the fact is, not everybody with dyslexia has a phonological processing deficit, but it's more than that anyway. It's eye convergence, it's comprehension, it's executive function, it's sequencing. The thing that surprised me most when I found out I was dyslexic was, I remember that the psychologist, I think he was a psychologist, gave me a particular test. And it was fascinating. She put a piece of paper in front of me. And on this piece of paper, I remember it quite well, there was a circle. And in the circle, there was a square. And there was like a diagonal line connecting two corners of the square. And then there was a line hitting the circle at a tangent and a little triangle on the end of the line or something. And she said, remember that? And I went, okay. She took it away and said, draw it. And I thought, right, shouldn't be too hard. And I drew it. And she looked at it and went, okay. When I saw her the next time, she put the original piece of paper down in front of me and said, do you remember that? And I could see my own sort of grubby fingerprints on it. Like, yeah, sure, I remember this. And then she said, do you remember this? And she gave me what I'd drawn. Now, this is where it gets really weird. I looked at it and I suddenly saw that I had drawn the exact opposite of what was on the original piece of paper. But that's not where it's really weird. It got really weird because the more I stared at it, it shocked me. And the more I stared at it, the less certain I was that I'd drawn a mirror image. I wasn't certain anymore. And it's that inability to sequence, that sort of left-right difficulty that I have, that suddenly made me think, oh, wow, there's more to it than what people say it is, you know.
It's game changing when that kind of breaks, and it's kind of exactly what you mentioned with your friends. Is do you kind of notice that it's everyone presents differently? It's kind of like we all have the base challenges, but due to the different experiences we've had, the learnings, the solutions we've applied in our lives, you know, we kind of come out differently. Like, have you seen that with your friends?
Yeah, completely. And some of my friends never really achieved academically, partly because what happens is if you don't read particularly quickly, you will only take in, let's say, one piece of information per chunk of learning. Everybody else around you takes in two pieces of information per chunk of learning. And every new piece of information you take in one, and then another one, and then another one, slowly, and you might forget the first one or something. Everybody else is taking two pieces of information in for every one you're taking in. And the gap between, if you like, academic attainment grows exponentially. They call it the Matthew effect. Effectively, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And you can see that in academia as well, that those who read slowly for everything, and they read around subjects slower. And so if you're looking at something in history, you'll get three pieces of history and the dyslexic person gets one. And then you'll be able to get three new things for every one of those three things you got. And the dyslexic person gets one new thing for every one that she got. And so she'll fall further and further behind. And that's because of the way the academic system is structured.
That's interesting. Yeah, I completely agree. Quick question I've got for you is then, I've always wondered this, is I wonder if it's, you know, we definitely read slower. Like, I definitely read slower if I do read, but is it a mixture of that and absorption? Because even if I get through a full book, I don't absorb the information either way. Like, I'll remember some of the key stories. Like, I love, you know, stories where I can visualize and picture what's on the page. Brilliant. Yeah. I can remember it. And then I sometimes, you know, I can sometimes see it in my long-term memory. Things will pop up, but my short-term memory has no clue what I just read.
Yeah, that's it. I sometimes forget what I've read at the beginning of a paragraph or the beginning of a sentence or even the beginning of a line. I mean, I'm doing my doctorate. I'm coming to the end of my doctorate, and I'm 50. I'll be 51 when I finish it, hopefully. That's not quick. You know, that's not quick. And I started it about 10 years ago. You should take 3 years to be a doctorate. I've taken 10. And it's partly because
you're going to be a better
an absorption, as you say.
You're going to be a better doctor for it, mate. You're a more experienced doctor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, it is, you delve deeper because you have to. If you want to get the information, you have to spend more time on it, and you have to go over it again, and you have to learn the art of cutting out the rubbish and keeping the stuff that's important and focusing on that. And yeah, it's a long, slow process.
Yeah, and that's a key takeaway, guys, is that, you know, we do use a lot more. It's a kind of an opposite thing, really. We use more words than we need to a lot of the time to get across the same point of view. So it's kind of like the opposite. We're actually very wordy human beings. Like I wrote an article the other day and had to trim, you know, 50% of it because it was just complete fodder or fluff. So you had to, you know, and we say, yeah. Do you find that yourself when you're writing kind of your masters?
Oh God, yeah. A thesis is supposed to be 80,000 words or something, and my thesis is about 8 chapters, and each chapter is about 16,000 words. And at some point, I'm going to have to edit it down, and I'm not looking forward to it. I'm really not looking forward to it. And one of the reasons it's so long, I mean, you know, apart from I waffle, one of the reasons it's so long is I made a decision with my supervisor at the beginning that, because we discussed my dyslexia and what I needed and the help I needed. And one of the things we decided, and this is perfectly acceptable academically, if anyone's thinking of going into academia, to write as I speak. You don't have to write sort of inauthentically. You don't have to write in the third person. In fact, you shouldn't. You don't have to write too formally. Write as you speak. And so if you can imagine, the things that I'm saying now are the things I'm putting down on paper, because that helps me read what I've written. It's my own voice, if you like. And
I love it, mate. And actually, funny enough, when we started this interview, I said we'll come up with a topic and let's go off mental health for a bit, because we'll touch on that. But let's focus on academia, because we get these questions a lot by kids who are going into college, even adults wanting to retrain. I'm dealing with another 50-year-old guy who's just gone back to school. You know, there's a lot of us who want to study. So like, if you've been doing it, I'd love to hear your experience, because you've been doing some work in the early childhood education as well. You know, what do you know, if you were to look at what you've learned since you were diagnosed, what has helped you deal with your dyslexia going through things like your masters and stuff?
Acceptance, simply acceptance for who I am, and finding out what my dyslexia means to me. I mean, I remembered, for instance, when I was younger and I was the bottom of the class, I was held back a year, 2 years at school at different points in my school life. I was held back twice. I dropped out a couple of times, went to night school. Everybody else was taking their A-levels, we call it, like your 18-year-old get to university exams, and I was retaking my O-levels, which 15-year-olds were doing. And school life was so hard for me. It was so hard. And one of the things I realized is the further up the academic ladder I got, the easier it got. Because the thing that made it hard was, if you like, what they would call in England, read, learn, and inwardly digest, and then regurgitate it all onto a page. So the teacher throws a ball of knowledge at you, you have to catch it and then throw it back at the teacher. That's what learning is at school. But it doesn't fit my style of learning. And the further up the sort of school ladder I got, the more I was allowed to interpret, the more I was allowed to make connections and to create an idea and run with that idea. So for people who haven't done well at school, that's not because you're not intelligent. That's because school is really inappropriate for a lot of the ways that a lot of people with dyslexia learn. It's set up for a particular sort of way of processing information, because 85% of the population processes information like that. But if you don't process information like that, the chances of failure are really high. All the other kids at school were getting like 60%, 70% in exams and essays. And I was getting, I kid you not, somewhere between 11% and 25% regularly. I mean, this isn't even graded. And now I'm doing a doctorate. Hopefully I'm going to be successful. So, I mean, I say that not to say, hey, I'm clever, because I don't mean it like that. But I mean, I'm clearly not stupid. And my school experience had marked me down as stupid, and I was told I wasn't clever by teachers. I mean, who does that? Who does that? You know, I was told not to bother going for this kind of job that I might want, but just to go for this kind of job that I could do, like serving in a shop. Nothing wrong with serving in a shop, but if you're restricted to that, not because of who you are, but because of an education system, then you know it's not a choice. It's something you're basically forced into, and it might not be appropriate for you.
Right, I'm so with you there, mate. I think many people struggle with it for that exact reason, is that education is really designed by left brain thinkers. You look back to what it was created for. It was created so people could continue to go to work, and the kids would be looked after and taught something. That's why it was invented as a crèche for what is it, 5 to 16-year-olds, really.
Yeah. And something interesting. I mean, I don't know what the coronavirus has done to New Zealand, but something really fascinating that it did to Britain is it meant that kids had to stay home. Now, this is really interesting, because when the government wanted the kids to go back, for political reasons or for educational reasons, they claimed educational reasons. Teachers unions and teachers, yeah, I know, yeah. Teachers unions and teachers would say, no, the government's giving you bad advice. You don't have to send your kids back to school. It's dangerous. Don't do it. Your kids are learning perfectly well at home. Now, what they've just betrayed is this idea that the only way of learning is to take people to school, to send your kids to school, to go through that school system. As soon as they say, no, 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 they can learn at home, they can do it perfectly well at home, they've basically just given the game away.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. Like I was listening to a podcast the other day of a guy who started the Khan Academy. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Yeah, yeah.
I listened to a great podcast on it, and this guy who started it was just started doing YouTube videos and training his cousins and nieces. I think it was nieces and nephews, makes more sense, virtually on math. And then he created this non-profit that I think it gets something like, it's had over 2 billion views of his videos. And you know he's teaching more people around the world than the schooling. It feels like the schooling system, because they probably don't teach that many, actually teach them.
I can tell you, and I'm convinced of this. I could have missed 90% of secondary school, and it wouldn't have mattered. And in fact, scratch that. It would have mattered. It would have benefited me, because I went through stress and torture and torment and shame and humiliation and depression and anxiety, having to go to school, hating every single minute of it. Whereas if I'd missed that, and if I'd learned using, I don't know, coolmathgames.com, or if I'd learned using Minecraft or something like that, if I'd learned using these online games, or if I'd traveled, or if I'd talked to interesting people, I would have learned such a lot more. So just by the act of talking to interesting people.
Well, we're naturally kinesthetic, aren't we? We're naturally kinesthetic. We like learning visually. We like getting our hands dirty. The thing I always say to people is, if you had to learn how to drive a digger, and you needed to learn how to do it, how would you do it? Would you read the manual top to bottom before you even sat on it? Or would you jump in it and start pressing knobs and just try not to hit the person standing in front of you, kind of thing?
Exactly. And this is really interesting. Now, forgive me, my doctorate is in philosophy, and I'm what they call a pragmatist in philosophy. You don't need to know what that means. It's boring. Don't go into it. But one of the great pragmatists was a guy called John Dewey, and John Dewey was an educational philosopher in the early part of the 20th century. And his educational philosophy, we've known it works since he came out with it effectively. The idea that learning is in the act of doing. And you only learn when you're uncertain. And so you need to factor uncertainty and ambiguity into lessons. And yet at school, learning isn't the act of doing. Learning is the act of reading or listening. It's not the act of activity. It's not the act of action. And they don't want uncertainty, they want certainty, because that's what they mark you on. And so if you like, school is doing the opposite of what we need kids to be doing. And if they'd allowed me at school to do activities, to talk to interesting people, to watch movies about things that I found fun, I would have learned that. I would have done, because that's one of the ways that I learn. But instead, we were sat in rows with a teacher at the front telling us, okay, if you want to say my name is Martin, it's Je m'appelle Martin. And I then had to remember that, and then learn how to speak French from trying to remember these things that I was forgetting after 5 minutes anyway. And of course I couldn't do it.
Mate, I'm with you. Like, it was funny. That brought me back to a memory of sitting in a classroom. It was probably the year before I left, and it was the I don't know, it was just the English class for, they gave it a nice name to make you feel okay, but all they did was play you movies and occasionally ask you a couple of questions about it. And in hindsight, that was a much better class than the other class.
You enjoyed it a hell of a lot more, didn't you?
I'm actually going to turn around my mind here and say, actually, I enjoyed it. Thank you for putting me in that class. I did actually meet some interesting people like me, other than sitting with a few, potential robots. It was an awesome experience. And I actually, I left school early because I worked out I could. Someone told me one day, did you know you can just go to the office and sign a bit of paper and they'll just let you leave school? And I went, really? So I did it that day.
I wish I'd known about that. Is it just the opposite of what you were allowed to do, or what, I don't know if you had to do? But the opposite of that is what I got in English, where I had to read Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd. I had to read Charles Dickens' Hard Times. I never did because I couldn't. I remember reading Charles Dickens' Hard Times. I think I got a page in. I still have no idea what was going. If they'd allowed me to watch a movie or discuss it with a theatre director or something, I'd have benefited far more.
Yeah. And if you think about, like, with the schooling you've done, you know, are there 2 or 3 tips that you go, I probably don't value these as much now because I do them naturally, but are there a couple of solutions that have come to you where that either help you focus on your masters or that support you in success with your dyslexia? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, my supervisor and I came up with this idea of train tracks. And so his job was to help keep me on the rails, as it were, because I would veer off and go in odd directions. And his job was to bring me back to that. It was also the fact that, I mean, look, this sounds really strange, but I found that my academic results they got a lot better once I changed the fonts I was writing in. And I wasn't using these special dyslexic fonts. I use something called Lilo Wadi now, by the way. It's really nice.
Okay, how do you spell that one? Gosh, why do they make them spell?
I know, yeah. It's kind of spelled as it sounds. Leela, Leela, Wadi, Wadee, Leela Wadi. But things like Calibri or whatever, it's just the one that worked for me. And instead of just reading and trying to remember it, I used to go to conferences. And it's that act of discussing, that act of being a part of it, that suddenly raised my standard. The reading hardly raised my standard at all. It told me things which I needed to know, but it didn't allow me to get better. And so another thing that I realized I had to do was be ruthless in cutting down the amount of reading that I do. Because believe it or not, much of the time you don't need to read as much as they tell you need to read. Basically, they tell you need to read it because it's their job. But, you know, what do you need to know? What do you need to have at your fingertips? What skills do you need? So for me, I study philosophy, and actually the study of philosophy is about knowing specific ideas, that's true, but being able to work with them. It doesn't matter that John Dewey wrote his seminal work in 1916 or 1926. Who cares? I don't care. No one around me cares. What's important is that he said that education requires uncertainty. Why did he say that? Well, let's work with that. Let's think about that. And then you discuss. So it's about having a supervisor or a tutor or a teacher who keeps you in the tram lines, at the same time having a group of people you can discuss with, because it's that discussion that teaches you. And if you have an argument with somebody over a particular point and you win that argument, great. And if you lose it, even better, you've learned something, if you're mindful about how you've lost it. And so, yeah, this is where the conferences came in. It's that act of discussing, but it's about being selective about what you read, what you talk about, and being ruthless about it, really ruthless about it.
I love that. And I think that's really, really key, you know, and this is the thing is where I've talked about this for a while about how our brains work. And we were naturally the kids in class that if you were asked a maths question, you could come up with the answer, but you couldn't work out how you worked it out. We were the ones that couldn't do the workings, and we were told we were stupid. So my belief has always been, ask yourself better questions to get the result you want, and don't follow the workings the teachers tell you exactly the way you're saying it. So like if you know you have to present X, let your brain play with it, talk to other people, get new inputs, and then trust that you have an absolutely unbelievable brain that's going to pull it out your ass and somehow make it work.
100%, yeah. And by the way, anybody who's wanting to make notes, I mean, just remember, I mean, it's the simplest thing in the world. Colors. You know, I always have 3 colored pens. I have a black, a blue, and a red. And the blue pen is for ideas that I'm writing down. The black pen is for quotations that I'm writing that other people have said. And the red pen is for important danger zones, or this is an argument against, or something. And then I use highlighter pens, and I'll highlight. And I'm using these colors so that I can just look at a piece of paper and know what I'm looking for. And I can see the highlighted bits that tell me this is the important bit, or this is the bit I haven't used yet, or something. And again, it's just this act of being ruthless in cutting down the amount of stuff I have to read.
That's brilliant. I love that, actually. Yeah, using different color pens. Colors are massive, and also colored paper can make a massive difference, or color binders, things like that just make it a little easier on the eyes. And the other one I was actually going to do in a video, and I'm going to do it around emails, is I got into the habit quite early on, because I'm not naturally great at doing paragraphs and getting them right. I just set myself a learning from a sales training I did, and they said, don't make a paragraph longer than 3 lines long. And you're better to get the paragraphing wrong and do 3 lines, because it's easier to read, than it is to just block paragraph, which I've seen. Like, I see that with dyslexics when they email me. I'm like, I can't read that because it's just a clump. Whereas if I get sent it in blocks of 3, I'm like, that doesn't seem as overwhelming, or it's easier to go back to as well.
Absolutely. And I also say, don't even indent your paragraphs. This is an interesting thing. So let's say you got a paragraph of 3 or 4 lines. A lot of people start by indenting the first line, and then they indent the first line of the next paragraph. And I don't indent the first line. I have the paragraph spaced out from each other, so that I can, so that they're obviously separate things, and it's not this big page worth of it's not a big page worth of writing. It's little chunks of writing that I can still look at. And I also draw little shapes, by the way. Sorry about that. I also draw little shapes. So if it's a triangle, I know that it's important. If it's a circle, I know it explains. And so often I'll have colors and shapes on my notes. The colors tell me what someone said, and the triangle says it's important. That kind of thing. And that's, so again, all I'm doing is I'm cutting down on the number of things I need to look at. So, those are my tricks, but other people can come up with their own tricks about how to reduce the necessity to read everything as much as people tell you have to read everything, because you don't.
No, you don't. And I think those are some great tips. And this is the key a lot of people are after are what are the tips they can test and try and measure. And everyone who's listening or watching is play with these ideas. This is the thing, is you don't have to stick to every single one of them. This isn't school. There's not a list that if you get something wrong, you're going to be slapped on the hand. But you've got to play with the ideas that come out of these interviews. And Martin's shared some amazing ones, and just make them your own. You might decide that pink is your color. That's absolutely fine. Martin will not be coming to your house to tell you off. So, just be aware that you're allowed to adjust things you hear, and that's what your brain is designed for. It's to take in inputs and then create things that work for you. Would you agree, Martin?
I would, absolutely. I'm just showing you something. Here's some notes I recently made for some of my work.
Awesome. Oh, yeah, wow.
Now, my handwriting's not great, but you wouldn't expect it to be. But you got that up there. It is, the little pink box there. You've not got an awful lot of work on it. You've got certain things have been highlighted with a little wavy line, that kind of thing. And I do that all the time. Other people can do what they want, but it's just a piece of paper, and I can see what I need to see just by looking at the shapes of it and the colors of it.
You got to find out what works for you. And I think this is the key, is that, take everything you hear as an input and then let your mind mold it. And I think, Martin, you made a great point, is don't get stuck in your own head. Don't just overthink things for 1,000 times. If you are studying, we're the ones that really benefit from study groups. If you get 3 or 4 of you together, you discuss things, you debate it. Like, we all love to chat about stuff and make people think we know we're right. So enjoy that. Enjoy that part of your life with people you trust and that want you to succeed. I think that's important. Would you agree?
Oh, completely. As I say, that's how I got better. I went through a period where I just thought that the only way to do this was to read and to write and to read and to write. And the more I did it, what was weird was the more I did that, the worse I became. I went through a period where I was doing producing really bad work. And it struck me that all I was doing was doing something that wasn't appropriate to me and then doing it more intensively. And that's not the way to get better. So the way to get better is to go, well, what does work? Oh yeah, talking to people. And that's, you know, and in fact, something else which I found, presenting. Because when I present to people and they ask me questions, I have to know what I'm talking about, and I have to order it in my own mind in a way that I think works. And that's a really great way of doing it.
Yeah, and there's a real I know exactly what you mean. A lot of us kind of have a screwdriver. I think if we screw it tighter and harder, it'll basically screw the screw in quicker and better. But all it does is break the head off. What we have to do is slow down and take a moment and go, how can I screw this in the most effective way? And then go and get a drill. And
yeah. Or even get someone else to help you. Now, this is the thing. There is this idea that academia is all about, I've done all this. It's not. As I say, I'm coming to the end of my thesis soon. My references are all over the place. They're dreadful. So I'm going to speak to a friend of mine who hopefully she might do it for free, or might give us some money or something to help me reference it. Because that's not the thesis, but it's somebody helping me do the bit that I can't do. I'm really bad with ordering things and putting things in the right order and making sure that everything is tied together like that. It's not the ideas from the thesis. It's just the references. Someone else is going to help me do that.
Man, I love it, and there's been so many great tips in this, and you know, I love how these interviews I seem to do with people, and why I love dyslexia is we're not fixed or locked on something. Like, we hadn't planned this topic, had we? We just kind of said, let's have a chat, let's enjoy a conversation and see where we can help the audience to grow. I can always put a title on it later, but it's like, you know, if we're leaving this, like, is there something you would love to say to students, people studying with dyslexia, to finish this off?
Yeah. I work with a lot of people internationally, and I was working with some people in Australia, and I was talking to a young boy in Australia, and he was about to transition from primary school to secondary school. And he looked at me, and it was horrifying. I mean, I remembered myself, but it wasn't just about remembering myself. It was looking at the expression on this kid's face. He looked at me and said, is secondary school going to be as bad as primary school? And it was heartbreaking. It was like, I couldn't tell him. I had to say, well, it's all about your friends, and it's about whether you make friends at secondary school, and how you enjoy making friends, and whether you find the teachers that you like to find. But the truth of the matter is, yes, secondary school is worse than primary school. It just is, because it's more industrial. There are more people there. Teachers have less time for the students. It tends to be more based on tests. You've got to get through your exams. And so I suppose the piece of advice is, when you're in secondary school, it feels like hell. For many people with dyslexia, it feels like you can't learn. It feels like torture. You become disheartened with yourself. But it's not like that. That's not what learning is, and it's not what the schooling system is. If you can get through that safely, if you can get through that without being broken, then after that it gets so much better. I love academia now. I love learning. Absolutely adore it. But if you'd asked me that when I was 13 or 14, I school days are the best days of your life, I'd have punched you. You know, I wouldn't even know what that means. So my advice, my pearl of wisdom, I suppose, is that school seems really horrible to many people with dyslexia, but that's not who you are, and it's not what the learning is. It's just the school system, because they have certain boundaries they have to put us through. They have certain funnels that we have to be pushed through, and it's not your fault. And actually, it may turn out that you didn't think that you were very good at school, but that has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with your ability to learn.
Oh, that's beautifully said, mate. You know, I nearly teared up there hearing the kid and saying, just that phrase of is secondary school going to be as bad as primary school? You know, that doesn't that just bring back so many emotional feelings for so many? And I think, you know, that's a beautiful message. You can get out the other side. It's not there forever. and ask for help. I think that's the key. Like, it's Mental Health Week in New Zealand. I'm not sure if that's around the world, but it's, ask for help. You're not an island. Every successful dyslexic, and I think majority of successful people, build a group of people to support and help them, help other dyslexics and right brain thinkers to thrive in this left brain world. It's we need to stick together to create the stuff that's going to impact the world. Climate change isn't going to be solved by someone who presses the same button 1,000 times. It's going to be solved by the dyslexics out there that think outside the box and can see solutions beyond it. And thank you so much for your time, Martin. You're epic. You also run a blog, don't you? Before I forget, because that usually runs out my head.
I do. It's not so much a blog; it's a little website called Dyslexia Bytes, BYTES, Dyslexia Bytes, BYTES.org. I release little videos on it, and I have little bits about dyslexia and homelessness, dyslexia and mental health, dyslexia figures, and dyslexia around the world. That's quite an interesting one.
Is that correct? Is that looking to spell that correctly?
That's perfect. I think. It is. Cool. Thank you. Brilliant. Wow.
Woo! Spelling. There you go. The technology. Yeah. So dyslexiabytes.org. Have a look. I'll try and convince Martin to write some stuff for the Truth About Dyslexia, or do some images or videos. We're kind of trying to get a group of people that are contributing to a central source, just trying to grow it in front of people. So I'll talk about that to you later, mate. But thank you so much for being on the podcast, on this video. If you're listening to it on your phone or your podcast and you want to see our beautiful faces, we are on YouTube, so just subscribe. And thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.